Recently, Silas and I did a trade where I would play Xenoblade 1 and he would play Final Fantasy X. I say recently because he finished Final Fantasy X sometime last October, and I just now finished Xenoblade. I got the urge to record my thoughts and put them out here. Every game I play, the idea of doing a review pops into my head, but I always think it sounds cringe and pretentious. This time it still sounds cringe and pretentious, but I didn't care. Some disclaimers before I start. I'm not a reviewer. This will probably be poorly formatted and not complete at all. I did not 100% the game, so if you think one of my criticisms is negated by some side quest in some town at hour 100, I don't care. This is from the point of view of someone who has other things to be doing, and playing games is like my fifth favorite pastime. For example, if I say something might take a long time, and you may love that it takes a long time because more playtime is a good thing, especially if this is your favorite hobby, then we would disagree on that point. Reviews are inherently subjective, so if you love something I hate and hate something I love, keep that in mind. This is my perspective. Part of the reason reviews feel so pretentious to me is that they hinge on either me thinking my subjective opinion of a piece of art should influence yours, or that my subjective experience with a piece of art is worth your time to hear. I'm making this for myself more than anyone else. I'd love for you to stick around and hear me out, but know that I will not be catering to any other viewpoints. There will be spoilers. This game is hardly worth discussing if I can't talk about late game events and characters. As we go on, you may notice the things I like about the game get very short blurbs, and the things I dislike get dragged through the mud. This is just because it takes more time for me to explain why I dislike something than to say I like something. Don't take it as a ratio of good to bad. This review may be 70% negative, but that doesn't mean the game is 70% bad. Far from it. One more thing, lots of reviews go in chronological order. I like this style, but be blunt, I don't have the patience for it. I'll discuss things when they feel relevant, and will assume that you know what I'm talking about if I mention a person, place, or event. Okay, let's jump into it. The story is pretty serviceable, peaking for me sometime around the midpoint of the game. I don't want to recap the entire plot, but I will discuss the parts that I like and don't like, as well as my overall feelings. The opening is pretty engaging for what it is. I wish we could have had a bit more time with Fiora before she died, because, while I know Shulk has lived with her forever and is enraged by her passing, becoming the primary motivation for him through the first 60% of the story, I personally don't care about her at this point. I grow to care about her and enjoy some of the later interactions she and Shulk have after rejoining the party, but for everything that I do end up liking and disliking about her, it all comes after she returns. When she dies, I feel very little on a first playthrough. It's serviceable, and I don't think it ruins anything, but if she had gotten more time like Ryan gets before making it to Colony 6, with Shulk alone, outside of the 20 minutes of gameplay and scenarios we get before that, it would have been nice. Aside from that, I enjoy the opening. I like seeing Shulk be smart, and that carries into the rest of the game. I like the Colonel, he's very funny. I like Dunban when he shows up, and appreciate him taking a bit more time before coming along. It lets Shulk grow into his own with the Monado. But the opening does provide a chance to discuss something I found mildly annoying throughout the game, and only really gets worse the more it happens. This game has a habit of showing you an enemy in a cutscene that destroys you and everyone else. Sometimes you even get a short fight to prove that you just can't win against them. But then the character just leaves, even though they're perfectly capable of killing you. Metalface does this several times, Egil does it, Zanza does it. The longer the game goes on, it becomes more unforgivable. Here in the opening, Metalface doesn't really know who you are or why it would be important to kill you, although the mumcar of it all makes it unclear to me if he knows Dunban, and if that's the case, I would argue that he should kill you right now, but whatever, I digress. But as the game goes on, it just becomes absurd. Zanza should just kill us when he gets the second Monado. Again, I understand that he thinks we're weak and he's going to leave it to his disciples, but if we really are that weak, he should just do it. He's God. We're the only group that has proved capable of knowing what he's up to, and it just makes Zanza seem kind of dumb. It's annoying. I won't mention this again as we go through the story, but just know it happens like 5 times throughout the story. It makes the journey feel like a fluke, a string of good luck. Everything after the opening until you get to Prison Island is kind of one big blur for me. This is probably because I took like a month-long break sometime in the middle of this part. This might be the most boring part of the game. You get new characters here, 4 of them, most of the cast, and somehow it's still boring. There's this part when you first get to the High Entia city, and they put you in a waiting room. And I swear, like 4 times you start in this room, go do something, and then the next chapter starts and you're back in this room. It's very repetitive, very redundant. Stepping back a bit in the story, you fight Zord during this part as well. I found that whole part very drab, the lead up to it. Going through the caves, having non-stop conversations about if Shulk should or could share his visions, or if he can or should change the future. These conversations are important, but they happen so close together, and there's so many of them that it just becomes boring. I will say one of my top 3 parts of the game is hidden in here, which is getting to meet Ricky. I find Ricky so annoying, but he grows on you so fast. And the reason he comes with you being the fact that he's like in debt to the village and they make him go with you is very funny to me. I love that.
While you were gone, your little pawns ate like ravenous Oluga. It set Chief Dunga back quite a bit.
In fact, the whole tree is a great setting and stands in opposition to something I don't love about the world, which we'll get into later. The build-up during this is important, and it makes everything that happens afterward possible since they get the introductions and setup out of the way, but I found the overall section of the game kind of boring. One more thing comes up during this part of the game. I don't know if anyone else will think this matters, but I want to discuss it. When you, the player, meet Melia, it's in a fight scene, and 2 of her men die from fighting the Telethia. The game brings up their deaths and sacrifices several times, but it felt awkward to me each time this happened. And after some thought, I figured out why. They were faceless, which doesn't help, but I think the bigger problem is that this game has such a hard time with how it cares about deaths. In Colony 9, during the opening, tons of people die. In Colony 6, tons of people die.
They ate people and burned our buildings.
And they're all sort of hand-waved away. Like, yes, the characters are distraught, but these are all these characters know. Their world is being flipped upside down. It really doesn't feel like it, though. Later, there are thousands of people dying at a time. Egil literally says something to the extent of,
How many?
Huh?
How many do you think died in that attack? Hundreds? Maybe thousands?
This is seen as a bad thing, but it's really never addressed. You may say, well, what do you expect? They're fighting Egil precisely because he's doing this. What more can I expect? A lot, I feel like, and you should too. It fucks with the scale of what I'm seeing and messes with the characters. I want you to imagine that you're on the moon, and you watch 30% of Earth get blown up. What's your first thought? Maybe, how can I stop more of Earth getting blown up? Could be, but that feels very robotic, very procedural to me. Let's say you think of that anyway, and you stop whatever caused the destruction. What's your next thought? Is it, I should understand and relate to the reason Earth was blown up? Again, maybe, and I do think that understanding is important. But my first thought to both of these times is, holy shit, everything I know and love takes place there. My life, everything is changed. And not only mine, but everyone. Either they died or know someone who died. Going to Xenoblade, Ricky's wife, Melia's brother, Juju, Athoron, all the people you take quests from, everyone you have met up to this point practically, they all could have died. I just expect this to be seen as a bigger deal, and yet I feel like the characters who Melia loses in the fight with the Telethia get more mention than this world-changing event. It just bugs me when things happen on this scale and then the plot just moves on. I have no problem with Shulk forgiving Egil. I believe in real life that choices are made by circumstances and no one is inherently evil. Be that as it may, the true scope of what's being conveyed here is not handled well. I can't help but draw comparisons with Final Fantasy X. Spoilers ahead. In Final Fantasy X, the world is in a cycle of despair, as they send summoners to essentially die, to ensure some random amount of years of peace for their world before Sin, the monster that destroys their world, comes back. Characters and villages are built around this destruction. In my opinion, one of the best scenes in any JRPG, the party has a moment at a village, devastated by Sin. Yuna must send souls of the dead as the remaining villagers watch on, crying, with the crying only intensifying as the scene goes on. They watch the loved ones pass into the far plane. Titus asks Lulu about what is happening, and while Lulu explains, there's this heaviness in the air, like Titus is questioning a fact of life. The game cuts to a pre-rendered cutscene where no one talks. You watch Yuna dance on the water over the dead bodies as their souls leave for the far plains. Once the whole event is finished, Titus is left to wonder how long this must go on, how long Yuna must perform the sendings. The villagers thank Yuna through tears, but Titus only sees horror. He explains how he never wants to see that again. Titus, when faced with the reality that these people live through, the reality that they all accept and tearfully mourn, feels repulsed and horrified. This scene is not alone. This is the attitude Final Fantasy X takes to people dying. The groundwork for how you feel about it is based on this scene. You understand how Titus and the party feel about and react to death, and you know how serious the game takes it. Xenoblade does not do this. Xenoblade does not mourn death as a horrific thing wrought on the world, but as an inconvenience, a stepping stone towards the goal. You may argue how Melia talks about her men should set that groundwork for the larger death numbers that we see later in the game, but I would argue it's in vain, as the game has already shown us this destruction with Colony 6 and Colony 9 in a much different manner. Despite all of this, you might be shocked to hear that I don't hold this against Xenoblade. Why? Because this is a common problem in media. Look at Star Wars as one example, or like any RPG. This is much more the absence of a positive than the presence of a negative. I mostly am bringing this all up to share that I view Final Fantasy X and similar media as special because of the reverence it shows for life, the thing we all share. Xenoblade's story is serviceable. It's interesting and unique, but when these fun ideas lack the human weight and emotion behind them, they turn to theory bait and fandom discussions rather than meaningful and impactful art. You may be listening to this thinking that I hate the game, but I don't. Rather, I think recognizing where one work fails makes way to better appreciate where another succeeds. The story after this point is interesting enough. The world building picks up, Prison Island feels like a fun reveal that also leaves you with plenty of questions for later on. The first meeting with Egil feels like an impactful moment and ends in a well-earned reunion with Fiora. I love climbing back up the Mekon to parallel what you did on Bionis. This game loves parallels, which we'll get into in the themes. Everything after the big twist feels climactic, and while it again suffers from the mass deaths problem I just talked about, it does feel like the events are escalating at an appropriate rate. Getting a bit into the world building, but I really liked going inside Prison Island and seeing the tables and the dining hall and having none of that explained. It just feels mysterious. Like you're at the end of the game, you know everything, and are ready for the final fight. And the game hits you with the you don't know shit, all through environmental storytelling, culminating in a Dragon King that you get zero explanation for. It works really well for me. Fighting Dixon in the same spot that the first giant is killed is another parallel I like quite a bit. Finally, you get the look how far you've come moment with the solar system backdrop, which juxtaposes the setting of the rest of the game really well. The reveal about Zanza and Maynif being scientists is whatever. It basically exists to serve Shulk's character. Elvis being God and AI is fine, if not a bit unnecessary. I ultimately enjoy the decisions and discussions that happen because of it though, so it gets a pass from me. Overall, I like the story. I think it's interesting and fun and develops a lot of cool characters and places, and only really missteps in how it handles some of the scale of what it's discussing. It does turn to some anime bullshit near the end, but honestly I don't view that as bad. JRPGs are long enough that they earn a little bullshit at the end. If all you care about is the story with some fun twists, fun characters, and fun developments, it's good. If you want something a bit more out of your stories, this might offer that as well for you, if not with a few small issues. I like the music quite a bit. Basically no complaints here. I've played a lot of Smash, so hearing some of the songs that I've heard so much in the past in their natural environment was really fun. Music isn't something I care about as much as story or gameplay, but I really enjoyed it, and having started Futures Connected can say that it doesn't seem to be a fluke. I'm very excited to hear more from the series soundtrack as I work my way through. Some of my favorites would be Engage the Enemy, Unfinished Business, and tragic decision. But overall, no real dips in quality here, at least for someone as uninformed about music as I am. The story is pretty meaningless if the characters are not worth caring about. Fortunately for Xenoblade, I found the characters pretty fun. I was going to talk about each character one by one, but after writing Shulk, I found I really don't care to write anyone else. Most of the party is pretty one note. It's a good note, but there's not much to discuss. I'll touch on Zanza later, and there's one exception to this, which is Melia. I have a bit to say about her in the base game, but after playing Futures Connected, I have a lot more to say about her, so I'll wait to talk about that until the Futures Connected section. Let's talk about Shulk a bit. Shulk is good. He cares about his friends, and he has moments where he yells really loud, and that gives him a power-up to defeat whatever is in his way. But he goes beyond that in many instances. I thought a lot of his exchanges with Elvis in particular proved to show that he is smart and understands things well before the other members of the party do. His intelligence is always part of his character, but in a subtle and down-to-earth way. It's not in your face, the way that I feel like a lot of RPG brilliant characters do. He reminds me of Luca from Chrono Trigger, which I assure you is a compliment. He also has a good sense of emotional intelligence. There are many instances of this, but I think all his interactions with Egil show this the best. He understands and relates to Egil and explains that they share the same pain. He refuses to kill him in what I view as the first step towards consciously refusing Zanza's will. He hears the command to kill him and expresses his desire to kill him, something that is understandable and almost encouraged by the player, as Egil is the direct cause of everything Shulk has struggled up to at this point. And yet he sympathizes with Egil, offering a chance to move forward while still condemning his actions. All this serves to show Shulk as a relatable protagonist. I found much of the story enjoyable purely because I liked how Shulk would tackle issues. Yes, a lot of it can break down to him getting revenge, but I love the honesty he has about that as well, for example when talking with the High Entia. I didn't want to see the story because I deeply cared about the story. I cared about the story because I wanted to see how it would further shape Shulk and explore his character. I appreciate his choices as well at the end, but we'll discuss those later in the themes section. Shulk was my favorite character, and keep in mind that while I'm only discussing him and Melia, with very little about the others, it isn't because I dislike them. I found them pleasant enough. They are simply to allow the game to explore Shulk to his fullest, and I do not hold that against any of the other characters. One sentence on every character for completion's sake. Shulk, very good. Reyn is dependable, and I like his relationship with Sharla. Sharla, I kind of find her boring, honestly. She never really gets to the peaks of some of the other characters. Dunban, I like that he felt like the adult of the group, and he even says as much at one point, but still listens to the others and admits when he's wrong. Ricky, never before have I felt such whiplash between hating and loving a character. Melia, Fiora, she feels sort of underused. I don't really buy her in Shulk, but for the most part she's passable. Dixon, Dick, Elvis. This guy was boring for most of the game. I hate characters that games want you to think are mysterious and cool. Egil. He mirrors Shulk in his anger, but in a more insane manner. I enjoyed that. Zanza. We'll talk about him more later, but as a character, he's fine, passable. Juju. I didn't rebuild Colony 6 just to piss Juju off. The world of Xenoblade is awesome. Even I can't come up with a great reason to get mad about this. When I first talked about Xenoblade with Silas, I knew nothing about the game's setting, and he explained it takes place in these two big creatures and locations are based on where you are in the body, and I remember thinking that sounded so cool, and wondered if it really felt like that or if it was a Mario Kart 8 situation where you don't really know when you're upside down. I'm glad to report it plays about as cool as it sounds. I really never got over looking out over the Mechonis or the Bionis and how it changed based on where I was. It just feels epic. The moment this hits me the most is when you walk on the Mechonis' fallen arm and into his palm and look up at both Colossi. It sets up so well for just how serious and huge it is when they start moving later on, even if I feel like it's not emotionally paid off. I legitimately think the concept of the world from Xenoblade is one of the coolest I've ever played. The world building is serviceable. I really don't have much to say here. I thought each of the species got a good amount of love and explanation, and nothing really seemed off or odd to me about how the world operated. Some stuff, like when they talked about the lake being above Ricky's tree, made me sort of confused about the layout, but I just trusted it made sense. As for exploring, I did very little. I ran straight through the game, but the few times I did go off the main path, I was not disappointed. There were unique locations, views, and enemies, and the game rewarding you with that secret area banner when you go super out of the way just feels great. If not for the combat, I would be tempted to 100% this game. The wound in the Mechonicus' arm especially stood out to me as special. The fact that you could go to this place for no reason other than, of course it's here. Why wouldn't it be? Is cool. Great setting, decent world building, fun exploring, the game nails this. Only critique I would have is that the quests can be kind of boring, but hey, you can't win them all. I have one small critique, which shouldn't be taken too seriously. Earlier I said that Ricky's tree stands in opposition of something I dislike. Ricky's tree is big, yes, and has some great views, but it also has this very cozy and interactive environment, which is what you'll be looking at most of the time while you're there. For a lot of the rest of the game, the camera sort of sets up these shots that implies it wants me to be in awe of how pretty the environment is and how cool the scenery looks. Somewhat annoyingly, it's correct and it is very cool, but often it just looks like a painting rather than something I get to interact with. It feels like the definition of the "it insists upon itself" joke. The game knows these shots look great and it's trying to get you to go, holy shit, that looks great, rather than just letting us look at what looks great. Like I said, I think this is more than anything else a me problem, but the way the camera moves for some of these shots just bugs me. This is it. Those of you who don't know me or haven't talked about games with me need to know something. I play games for combat.
Let's go, Johnny!
I know. Video games are dynamic media that allow you to experience music, storytelling, and world building all at the same time. But let's be honest, there are very few games that live up to the quality of any of these aspects that other media dedicated to one of those aspects can create. My favorite video game story is probably Final Fantasy X, but for all I think Final Fantasy X does great, for every scene that sticks with me, for every moment that I get goosebumps thinking about, I could name a movie that eclipses all of Final Fantasy X's accomplishments in my eyes from a story point of view. And why wouldn't they? Movies have one goal, and that's to communicate a story and share a viewpoint through it. For games, that's just one of their goals. I think The Founder tells its story in a better and more compelling way than Final Fantasy X. But, and I don't love comparing cross-media genre, but I would say Final Fantasy X speaks to me more. Why? Because games have the advantage of gameplay. You develop a much stronger feeling for these characters because to an extent you are the characters, sometimes making decisions for them, but as a minimum playing as them. Their success is your success. Their failures, yours. I'm going to come right out and say that before we finish this review, I think Xenoblade is a good game. I think the story is decent. The protagonist is great. The world is fascinating and the music is awesome. But I don't love it for one reason. The combat. This is why you should take all reviews with a grain of salt. If the combat is not important to you, I think this game's incredible. But unfortunately, combat and gameplay is important to me. It's what makes a game a game. It's the interactive part of the medium, and it's what I would be doing with 90% of my save file. And that's conservative when talking about Xenoblade. I powered through this game, and I did most of the story, and could probably double my playtime, doing just more gameplay through side quests and unique monsters. Hopefully you can see why, for me, gameplay is so crucial to the game's experience, so we can discuss the good, the bad, and the what the fuck for Xenoblade. I want to split this into two categories, inside combat and outside combat. Outside combat will be fast, because it's whatever. I'm just going to rapid fire some things. The menus in this game are atrocious. There's like 3 of them, and it's very hard to navigate. It's probably a skill issue, but I do not enjoy navigating the menus. The side quests are fine. They basically boil down to encouraging you to grind a bit, and that's fine. But there's too many that are just slop to me. My eyes glaze over every time some NPC starts talking to me about how some bunny attacked them and now I need to kill their entire bloodline. The gem crafting was annoying at best. I'm enjoying how Futures Connected lets you just pick them up from the mining spots. That system seems much better because it cuts out this dumb minigame and gives me a real reason to go to the mining spots. Rebuilding Colony 6 gave me Bravely Default flashbacks, and that alone was enough to make me not want to engage with it. I'm only half joking. I like getting XP from exploring. Genuinely might be my favorite gameplay idea in the game. Picking up items sucks. I hate knowing that any random item might lock me into a cutscene for some character talking about how we needed 12 lemon drops to rebuild Colony 6. Really fast side note. You may have noticed I'm showing other people's gameplay. That's because I didn't record anything and don't have the game anymore. This is fine for the most part, but for gameplay, it's annoying. It's been hard to find examples of what I'm talking about, or really anything outside of full game Let's Plays, and I don't feel like sifting through those right now. So I'll be drawing them, but just trust me, everything I described happened to me in-game. Okay, combat time. This shit fucking sucks. And I don't even feel bad about saying this, because what I read online makes it seem like a lot of people know this, and it gets better in the later entries, so I hope I'm not stepping on too many toes. Let's get into it. Starting off with your party. 7 characters, and you can play as all of them. That sounds fun, right? Well, no. You basically have to play as Shulk. I know this is a skill issue and not exactly true, but hear me out. On your first playthrough, you basically have no idea when you'll be fighting Mechon. And without Shulk doing the enchant, the party is worthless, so he has to be in your party for that. But at least for me, the AI was fucking dog shit. Add in that Shulk gets break moves early, and break then topple is so strong. We will get to this. Especially in the early game, you need him. I'm sure on repeat playthroughs it's fine, but I don't give a fuck about those. Quick editing note, there seems like there's other weapons you can use that hurt the Mechon, but by the time you get them, you're already so used to Shulk in your party, and he's already been encouraged through the use of break and topple, that I think it's pretty reasonable to assume a lot of people still stick with Shulk even after that. These weapons also seem like they could be missable, though I can't confirm that, but I think the point still stands about the game encouraging you to use Shulk over the other party members. Okay, so we have to play as Shulk throughout the game. That's fine, right? Yeah, I guess, except Shulk is a glass cannon. He wants to do damage without having aggro. What draws aggro? Doing arts and healing. Oh, okay, so what does combat look like? Essentially, you do your strong moves, use Shadow Eye, and auto. Rinse and repeat. Every fight. In the whole game. Over and over and over. I struggle to convey how boring this gets. There are, countable on one hand, very few story fights that require anything more than this. This is at the core of the issue with combat. You get new party members who look fun to fight as, and then don't get to do it because you're stuck as Shulk. Even if you play as someone else, you're still going to get into this loop because everything has a very redundant game plan. What bugs me the most about this is that there's such an easy fix. Let me switch who I'm controlling mid-fight. They do it during chain attacks, which is the most fun part of combat. Just let me do it all the time. You can even do it after a vision. We'll get to those too. But not all the time. I would let them crank the difficulty as well because you have so many more options if you can switch between characters. I genuinely can't think of a reason not to let us do this. You could play as Shulk, set up enchants and breaks, then go Dunban for topple, or Melia for sleep. This would not fix everything with the combat, but it would fix a lot of the boredom I have from the game. You were bored because you play Shulk and do the same thing over and over? Sounds like your fault. No, that contributes to my boredom, but it is not the biggest offender by far. Let me describe what the average fight looks like for you, playing as Shulk, Dunban, and Ricky. Shulk, break. Dunban, topple. Shulk, daze. Ricky, dance. Chain attack. Repeat. This never stops. There's almost nothing in this game that does not get broken, toppled, then dazed. your local deer, ancient giant, and God get broken, toppled, then dazed. There's not a single reason to do anything else. Throw in moves that refill your gauge, and I genuinely wobbled some bosses. It doesn't help that some of the early fights against Mechon require you to do this, so it gets in your head as a playstyle. I wager most playthroughs look like this. It isn't fun. Just don't do it. Okay, thanks Sherlock. This is an argument that comes up a lot in online Discord. Don't use the broken thing. If you can play this way, great. I'm glad for you. But I know something is intended by the devs and is my best option. I don't know how I could do anything else. Honestly, there were so many times my team did this without me even trying. That's how built into the game it is. I beat several red enemies. We'll talk about this too, this way as well. It's just that engrossed into combat. Visions. Visions hurt me to harp on, because it's a unique idea and ties the combat into the story, which I'll give credit for. I think it's super cool they tried this. Unfortunately, it feels like dog shit. There are almost too many problems to count, but they all build on one issue. It stops the flow of the game. It takes complete control away from the player, and cancels what you are doing with no warning. I've had purges, shields, and backslashes just stopped by this. Wow, I sound angry, and with good reason. That sounds pretty dumb. What I'm even more angry about is while I looked for an example of this, I could only really find this clip, where Shulk is doing backslash, and it very much does not get canceled. I know for a fact I have had moves canceled by this. In particular, at the start of the dragon fight at the end of the game, I would do a purge on it, and while it was in the air, he would give me a vision, and then the purge wouldn't affect him. I'm not sure if that's because purge is a Monado art, or a projectile, or if in this clip Shulk is doing backslash and gets far enough into the animation so it doesn't get canceled. Or maybe I'm misremembering and it clears the queue, so when I was doing purge it was readied to be my next attack, but then the vision got rid of the queue. I wish I still had my copy to try and lab this out, because now I'm genuinely curious, and maybe someone can explain it to me. I have no intentions to lie, and if I'm mistaken on this entirely and some other thing happened to me, which whenever I swear a vision was stopping a move, that's my bad. I still have problems with vision, which we'll see, but if it never cancels moves, then that makes it a lot less abhorrent. In the best case, it gives you time to react and save someone. This is fine. But far more often, it halts combat for something you don't need to be alerted of. Or, even more frustratingly, something you can't do anything about. Here are some scenarios where I've had it trigger and just drag on the fight. Triggering when nothing's going to happen. I'm guessing there's an in-game timer for when a fight's taking too long. They'll just give you a vision for basically anything, especially in mob fights. I would get visions for very weak attacks that won't cause anything to happen, but I still have to sit there and watch it. Triggering when my whole party is dead or knocked out. So I have to sit there and watch myself die twice because I can't do anything. Triggering literally half a second before you kill the enemy. So you have to watch this frog's dying wish before killing him, the instant the scene is over. Triggering when you can't do anything. Similar to number 2, but it's if a boss is going to do an action that you can't prevent in any way. So you just have to watch them do it twice. Triggering when leaving a fight. Nothing in this game makes my blood boil like this. I'm losing a fight. I need to run. Obviously, my team is dying if I'm running away. So almost every time I need to run halfway across the map, leaving combat, and watch this vision of Ricky, far off in the distance, dying, even though I'm about to be out of combat. And nothing about it matters. They all serve to waste my time. None of them are as unforgivable as it canceling moves, which, may I remind you, it cancels your moves, but they make the whole thing feel like a drag, and it had me rolling my eyes every time a vision popped up. I've seen people online defend this mechanic because it integrates story and gameplay, and as I mentioned at the start, I agree, but we have to understand that that does not make the actual gameplay better. Something can merge story and gameplay and be bad. They aren't mutually exclusive. Visions are a sore spot for me. I really wish they were good. They are not good. Okay, let's talk about enemy color. This one's personal. When you see an enemy, there'll be a color, relative to your level as far as I can tell. Black if they're way below you, blue if a little below you, gray if appropriately leveled, yellow if over your level, and red if much higher than you. What could possibly be wrong with this? This sounds like a helpful way to tell the player what they should and shouldn't fight at a glance. How is this even in the in combat section of the video? I hear you. That's what I thought for most of the game. Then I get to Lorithia, a fight that I'm told is notorious, and I can see why. I can hardly hit her. This fight feels impossible, like I can't do anything. I do some Googling, people recommend Melia. No luck with that. More Googling. Someone recommends leveling up until she's blue. I think, that's a strange thing to recommend. Are they using the color as a reference, or does it matter? Why not say, like, a specific level? I Google more, and fuck me, you get an agility reduction against red enemies, so you can hardly hit them. Sure enough, Lorithia is red for me. I grind one level, she becomes yellow, and I beat her the first attempt. Why is it like this? I thought the point of levels is to indicate stats. What's the point of leveling up to boost my stats when they can just be moved down for no reason? If the enemy is higher level than me, its stats should be better than mine. That's the challenge of fighting a higher leveled enemy. Why on earth would they make it harder? It just further discourages engaging with red enemies. I have no doubt you can beat red enemies with proper strategies, probably involving lots of topples. That's not the point. On a casual playthrough, if you're not looking up strats and theory crafting, you basically won't fight reds. So they just either become landmines in fights that force you to retreat if they get pulled in, or they're walls that you're forced to grind to yellow. I really do not understand this design. My point is not that hard enemies shouldn't be available to the player. It is that we already have a complex system of stats and levels to allow the developers to make these hard enemies. Why make it scale exponentially how hard they are? It makes it feel very video gamey when I know I just need one more level to beat a fight. Not because I think one more defense will make the difference, but because I passed the artificial cutoff for the game. This is bad design in my opinion. I like the colors. I think it's cool to give a metric to the player for how hard an enemy is, so they feel good about beating certain ones. I don't think it is good to tie arbitrary debuffs to that, especially when it happens on the last fight in the game with no way to level up into yellow without redoing the entire ending sequence, which gives you an idea of what the minimum level needs to be. I was, again, one level under what was needed for Zanza to be yellow, and I had to redo the ending of the game. Again, I'm sure this is a skill issue, and I could have beat him on red, but my point is that shouldn't have even been a problem. I don't even know if the other colors do anything. I read that maybe black enemies can't hit you, which is just as dumb, but obviously less annoying. Maybe somewhere in the game this is explained what each color does and what the changes are, but if it is, I missed it. And even if I saw the mechanic explained, it's still a poor mechanic. That doesn't change. What are we left with now? A combat system that encourages fighting things your level with a repetitive rhythm, using the same arts over and over in the same order. The combat of Xenoblade is the reason I will never replay this game. It is the reason I don't explore more than necessary. It is the reason I will look back at this game with a twinge of annoyance rather than the admiration I think the rest of the game deserves. Which ties it back to what I said at the start. If none of this in the combat bothers you, and you still love the game, that makes complete sense. More power to you. These are far from the only problems with the combat. I could talk about your character AI being awful, or the leveling up arts being tied to extremely rare enemy drops, or enemies joining into combat making your winning encounter losing because they wandered over, or your AI teammate randomly hit them, or some of the boss gimmicks being no fun, or the character balance appearing to be terrible, or Monado Purge being genuinely one of the least fun things to set up and use in the game. But all of these are things I could get over. However, the trifecta of topples, visions, and enemy colors are enough for me to hate most encounters in the game. There are things I like, some quite a bit, and it wouldn't be fair to ignore them. Chain attacks are fun and a much better use of how I think visions wanted to work. They let you adapt to your circumstance, and even though they enable topples, it's not really their fault. Definitely the most fun part about combat. It makes me wish I could just play as everyone the whole time. The other thing I really enjoy is positional gameplay. Having to go on the side or behind to make moves effective is fun. It reminds me of Chrono Trigger. When you consider that with chain attacks, you get to make some fun, fast decisions about how you orient everyone before starting a chain attack to get the most out of it. I wish more moves used this feature to really push it further, but nonetheless, what's there in the game is fun. Finally, and this feels dumb to say and isn't really related to combat, but I really like the banter. There should have been more voice lines, yes, but I'll never not get a chuckle out of Ricky saying, "Not bad, not bad," and Dunban responding in kind, "Not bad at all."
Dream Edge! Ricky, mighty hero pawn. I can see that you're in pain.
Nothing can beat Ricky.
Dunban, you're embarrassing Ricky.
It's cute, and yeah, it's repetitive, but that's sort of the charm as well, at least for me. I like that all the characters have these unique voice lines with everyone in the party. It makes the group feel much more like a lived-in family than just video game characters. Surprise! This video is a philosophy discussion. Only half kidding, but I do want to discuss what the game is trying to say to the player. The game has a strong emphasis on the future, obviously. Shulk often deliberates on how he can stop the bad future he's seeing from happening, and it weasels its way into a less than stellar gameplay mechanic. But going beyond the Monado and the visions, the uncertainty of the future, in contrast to the past, is a commonality between all the characters. Shulk is clear enough. His past is a mystery in the game, where he came from, who he is, and that contrasts the literal certainty of his future for most of the game. One that he can see as if it's happening now, and yet his uncertainty about these events and what he should do still surrounds him throughout the game. Dunban, who was once the hero who protected Bionis and the Monado, is now a guardian for the new owner of the Monado, unsure about how it will affect his body. Rhine is an irresponsible klutz who the game pokes fun at constantly. One time he pushes a button that he's not supposed to and everyone dogpiles him. Is given the responsibility by Gatto to watch over Sharla. Sharla, who has spent her life in Colony 6 caring for Gatto and Juju, dependent on her home as we find her, takes on the mantle of the one going on the journey, saving the world. Ricky, living the peaceful family life, but in debt to the community, almost a white-collar sort of life in a funny way, goes on a journey that is in direct contrast to all of that. Melia, the descendant of a 1,000-year-old lineage with traditions and proper succession, coming into her own as empress, gets told that she'll be the last ruler of the city. Fiora, a normal girl living in a normal colony, is turned into a robot, not sure how she can or will live on once Lady Maynif leaves her. Every character goes on this journey, or is dragged into it, in a way that directly contrasts their past. It is no coincidence that all of the characters have the exact opposite of their day-to-day lives happen when they go on the journey. Nor is it a coincidence that the one main character we know, Dixon, who a journey like this would have been perfectly in line with his past, is not with us as a party member, and later is revealed why. He does not have the same uncertainty about the future, so why deviate from his past? These futures, differing from their lives before, shifting at the point that they choose to join Shulk on his adventure, is very clearly giving the indication that their life and future is within their own control, which I believe is the central theme of the game. Which you might be thinking is obvious, and I could agree, but there is some nuance that I want to step into. Mainly, it is that the main villain is set up as a dichotomy to this. Not only in the obvious way that he claims to be controlling Shulk's future, but also in the long-term goal. Zanza wants a rebirth of the world, and begin a cycle of creation again. His goal is to return to the past, over and over, not deviating from what he knows. He's not planning some power takeover or some dramatic change to the way he will run the world in the future. Simply a reset to where it once was, and if he succeeds, new life will spring again. Viewing Zanza as evil requires you to believe one of three things. And since the game views Zanza as evil, we can assume a moral for each one of these three. First is that life that exists now dying, even with the knowledge that it will exist again, is bad. I know, death bad, please clap. Joking aside, you must acknowledge that we view life at the point in time that we are living to be worth more to us. This makes sense since it's when we're living and what we know. Think about the Black Plague versus Fairy Tale Kingdom. The fact that YouTubers go out of their way to even say the latter, and yet you still might know what I'm talking about without even getting the joke should be proof enough. One of these events is talked about in a fascinated manner of something that happened a long time ago, versus one that's politically and emotionally charged no matter the angle you discuss it, despite the former causing more death. Is Zanza inherently bad if the total amount of life will end up being the same? To those of us living now, of course. In this, I believe not only is Xenoblade telling us the importance of viewing the future as a landscape of possibility, regardless of the past, but also the value of living and appreciating the present. What's the point of looking forward to the future if you don't enjoy it when it becomes your present? The second would be that no one should determine the future of others. Maybe some people could come to grips with letting our world die if it meant a fresh start for a new life, unburdened by what would come. But those people should not make that decision for everyone. Zanza is making his choice, not from the goodness of his heart, but for self-preservation. Regardless of that, he's making the choice for everyone, something the game itself will outright tell you through the protagonist is bad. Third is that simply reliving the past over and over is inherently not productive. Maybe you also believe that all-knowing gods have the right to make a decision for all of us, but you must still acknowledge that Zanza is not making a choice to further progress or start over in hopes of something better. He is making a choice out of fear for himself. This is reactionary in nature. Zanza is stuck in the past and will not hear any change to the way the world works because of his seat in power. It takes a group of people not happy with how the world works to uproot this. The game goes on to have Shulk address all three of these issues, proving, at least to me, they are intentionally placed there for the player to understand, grapple with, and ultimately relate to Shulk's decision on. He rejects the first point simply by defeating Zanza.
It is time for you to choose. Does this world belong to Zanza, or does it belong to you?
That is something I decided long ago!
And continuing to live on in the world, wrought by destruction, rebuilding and bettering for the people who live there now. In a world where lots of the land and people have died, he decides to work with his friends to make a life better for others and rebuild their world, rather than giving into despair, maybe wishing they could restart. He picks up where they had left off. He rejects the second point very plainly in his final wish. He wishes for a world without gods.
Tell me your decision for the future of this world.
I won't decide. The future should be decided by each and every person in the world. And so, what we wish for is a world with no gods.
In this world, and in this story, everything anyone has done is a direct result of gods, Zanza and Lady Mayneth. Gods, in the context of Xenoblade 1, are not simply powerful beings, but rather beings that determine the future for others through their decisions and manipulations. When given the option to become a god, Shulk gives it up and destroys the notion of a god. Shulk is saying that not only should the future not be set for you, not only should you have the possibilities in front of you, but that no one, including Shulk, should be making those decisions for you. Shulk, and the game as a whole, is communicating that you are in charge of your fate, as you should be, regardless of the good or bad implications of this. The third point is rejected mostly in Futures Connected, but there are bits of it in this ending cutscene. A world moving forward is no good if it doesn't work to address the wrongs of its past. If it continues to live in a way it has, then it's no better than the loop that Zanza would have had them live in. You can see bits of the Machina living with the Homs and High Entia, a point that is later addressed and more directly in Futures Connected. You can view this however you want, the game views it as positively, but even if you want to view it as apolitical, or even further as a negative, it doesn't change that the game is showing you a change to the structure of society. brought on by the people of their own choice, something the game is telling you is inherently positive due to the way that it rejects Zanza's philosophy. Is this all effective? I believe the game is clear in what it's trying to communicate and how it's doing it. I have one major gripe with all of this. There's this indication when Shulk is killed and Zanza's revealed for the first time that you should now realize everything was planned by Zanza, carefully orchestrated for his return.
There was never anyone called Shulk to begin with.
What?
This is a pivotal point in the game because not only are there major story ramifications, but it also drives the central theme home. Zanza was in control. Zanza was determining your future. And everything you do after this is viewed as you taking control, Shulk taking control of his future and saving the world. My issue with this is that it doesn't feel like a gotcha. Everything Shulk and the party do in the story is logical, even with perfect information. Imagine you played the game knowing this twist. Maybe you have replayed it. There's not a single moment I can think of where I'm like, no, don't do that. That's secretly really bad, and you have no idea. Some of you are probably thinking Prison Island the first time around, and that's probably the closest it gets, but still they had to do something. They were all going to die. Metalface was killing people. Shulk needed the Unbound Minato to defend everyone. Most of the conflict is to try and stop Egil, who's patently insane, and he already knows Zanza's bad. He calls Shulk Zanza. He knows what's happening, and he's still killing everyone. He's going to do it because he knows everything.
How many? How many do you think died in that attack? Hundreds? Maybe thousands?
We would have to stop him regardless of that. It just rings hollow to me, because it doesn't feel like Zanza was controlling everything. So it doesn't feel like I'm starting to take control of my future in the last chapter, because it's always felt like that. I resonate with the theme of this game, but the point in its story where this should have felt the most impactful does nothing for it. The marriage of story and theme isn't great for me, and I'm really sad to say that. There is one more thing I want to discuss, and it's something I discussed earlier. This game is packed to the brim with parallels. Here's a couple of them. The Bionis and the Mechanis, Zanza and Lady Mayneth, Shulk being possessed by Zanza and Fiora being possessed by Lady Mayneth, Shulk freeing Zanza at Prison Island and then defeating him at Prison Island, Telethia being pure ether, the lifeblood of the Bionis, and the Mechanis being pure machine, just like the Mechanis. Faced Mechons holding on to some humanity, and Telethia doing the same with Melia's brother, but also in futures connected. Shulk wanting revenge for the death caused by Egil, and Egil wanting revenge for the death caused by Shulk, Zanza. Climbing up the Bionis and later climbing up the Mechanis. There's several more. They're everywhere. And they mostly serve as a don't judge the book by its cover moral. Often you're presented with two things. One's good, often being related to the Bionis. One is bad, tied to the Mechanis. And then you later learn that the Bionis one is bad and the Mechanis one is good, or morally ambiguous. One interpretation is that it alludes to the idea that from similar starting points you end up with very different results, enforcing the idea that the future is not predetermined. My personal favorite reading, as it provides another theme and feels very relevant to day-to-day life, is seeing the humanity of those that oppose you and understanding and critiquing the immorality within. Bionis is good, Mechanis is bad. But you start to learn that the Bionis has its issues in the form of Zanza, and the Mechanis has people just like Hams, who just want to live peacefully. Shulk with visions is good, because it lets him fight better and understand where to go. Fiora with robot body is bad, because she's not human, and she might die. It gives a sense of unease. Then you learn that Shulk's possession is bad, and almost destroys the world, whereas Fiora's saves her life multiple times. I could go on, but I really like this, since I think it ties into the story better than the main future theme. And personally, I think the idea of self-critique and introspection over judging and anger is much less tread than seizing your future in media as a whole. The game is more subtle about this, so I may be reading more into it, where the future theme is very in your face, but I still believe that there was intentionality behind this. I hadn't originally planned on discussing this, but as I played it, I felt more and more like there was a lot I wanted to say. I won't go too in-depth for a lot of stuff here, but I do want to touch on a few things, those being the combat, the story, and the characters. Things like the music, world building, and themes are all pretty much the same quality here, and I don't feel the need to dive into them too much. The combat, I'm thrilled to announce, is better. This is basically due to one fact, which is that visions are gone. You know when I said I wouldn't replay Xenoblade because of the visions? I didn't explore much for the same reason. The combat was terrible. This was proven true because by removing visions and drastically reducing the amount of red enemies you run into, with only about a 15 level window with few exceptions, I ended up playing all of the side quests and exploring the whole map. I didn't 100% it because I'm missing some character conversations and such, but I did most of the content, found all the Palm Specters, and even did the level 80 super boss. The loss of chain attacks hurts a bit, but I found the Palm Specters to be a fine replacement for how short this is, especially since you don't really get them till halfway through. I suspect they would become boring in a much longer game, but this isn't longer, so it's fine. I enjoy the smaller party, honestly, as well. Much less to manage outside of combat. The break topple days issue returns, but because you don't get chain attacks, it isn't nearly as loopable, making it a good source of damage as opposed to the boss-slaying juggernaut it is in the base game. There are still issues, don't get me wrong, but overall I found the combat much more enjoyable in this, which I am pleasantly surprised by. I don't think the world was any more or less interesting to explore this time around, but because I wasn't dreading getting into fights and the levels of the enemies were much more in line everywhere, I got to really dive in deep and check out the whole area, which was a blast. Kinda makes the combat sting even more from the base game. The story here is also pretty good. I like seeing how the people are living after the events of the game, and seeing the conflict between not only Machina and Hyentia, but also between the pureblood Hyentia and the half-blood Hyentia, and even a bit with the Nopon, with one of them getting a very surprising late-game boss fight. Seeing this conflict in the changing world is cool and feels like it builds naturally on the groundwork set out by the game. I've seen some people call it boring, and I sorta get that, not a ton really happens. It's essentially go to one village, go to another village, bring the first village to the second village, stop the Fog King. There are events that happen between, but nothing really that story relevant, mostly just fetch quests to get gems or research. That said, the slow pace and more relationship-focused dilemmas felt fitting for the smaller, dare I say, cozy setting. It almost makes me wish that the main game didn't destroy the environment. I feel like they could have made a couple of games focusing on the world of the Bionis before building to the events of what the game ends up being about. I understand why this isn't what happened, but I bring it up solely to highlight how much I enjoyed the story. It's nothing groundbreaking, no Citizen Kane here, but it works, especially for what I think the story really wanted to do, which was fix... Melia might have one of the best video game character glow-ups I've ever seen. Base game, she's fine. She becomes Empress, then joins Shulk, only really talking occasionally to affirm what someone in the group says, or to look at Fiora and how much of a Giga Chad she is, and how she'll never be with Shulk because Fiora is so much cooler than her. I sorta hate it. She has the responsibility of a nation on her shoulders, and yet she basically only gets development after the Prison Island point in regards to Shulk. I waited to talk about this, but one issue with the characters in this game, especially the women, is that they basically only get development through their significant other. Ryan with Charla, Charla with Gato, Melia with Shulk, Fiora with Shulk. Shulk has a lot with Fiora, but he also has some with Dunban and Melia and Zanza and Dixon and Elvis. He is the main character, so it makes sense, but it's just frustrating how no one else gets this treatment. Melia felt like the most wasted potential in this regard. A leader, doubted by half her people, leaving her country to fight, but even that is in regards to Shulk. Charla says as much when they leave. I wouldn't have brought any of this up because it isn't really that bad, just annoying. But the reason I do bring it up is because I think the devs agreed with me. Future Connected is Melia's game. Shulk is there, but Melia is the main character. Side note, just to mention it, I like seeing Shulk take a more passive role. It's fun to see him as a party member rather than the chosen one, who the fate of the world relies on. Nothing wrong with that, just a fun contrast to the base game. Regardless, Melia rocks in this, straight up. They did an entire game where her and Shulk are together, and I didn't detect a single time the game tried to push that relationship as romantic. It might be buried in there, but I didn't see it. It's almost like the devs bragging. Yeah, We can stick them together and still have Melia focus on and work towards issues that she naturally would. Instead of a meek third wheel, we get a fucking leader. Someone fighting for her people. Like, Futures Connected Melia is my favorite character in both games. She should be yours too. She is legitimately well written. I know I said it was Shulk, but that was before I played Future Connected. The best attribute of Melia is that she relates to, understands, and challenges people's views. Most of the characters she interacts with are high entia, so it naturally makes sense for her to feel responsibility for their well-being and actions, both when it aligns with and conflicts with her own personal beliefs. With Teelan and Tyrea, she sees the importance of the research they are doing, even calling it the future of their people.
The research.
How can you be so fixated on that?
Our salvation lies therein.
Both Teelan and Tyrea had lost people who became Telethia, something Melia also experienced. But rather than that being all she talks about in regards to the research, that context is left up to the player. Instead, Melia gets to show her desire to ensure the future of her people in the form of the research. For a disagreement with her people, we look to Galgar, who believes that the discrimination he and Melia faced as half-bloods should be cause enough to do the same to the full-blood High Entia, wanting to have Melia lead this crusade. He tries to kill Tyrea and Teelan. Later, Melia explains to him that what he's doing is no better and that he is wrong. Unable to deal with this, Galgar willingly ends his life. The party discusses this and says that it isn't Melia's fault, and Melia wonders if he felt as if this was all that was left for him. As they walk away, she glances back, with a sorrowed look. Melia, even after being attacked by him, feels the loss of one of her people. As a leader, she mourns him and contemplates what more she could have done and what should be done in the future to avoid this fate for more of her people. Finally, there's this moment where she must convince Maxis to come aid those at Grandel. Maxis, a member of the Guard, knows not that Melia is their ruler at the moment. He just thinks she's some High Entia girl. She could probably just tell him that she is their leader and get him to come, but she doesn't do this. Why? Melia knows the importance of understanding her people, and, more importantly here, having them understand her. If she just commands them what to do, what kind of leader is she? One that tells men to commit acts that they don't see as correct, or that they don't want to do. She knows she must convince him. Her explanation that they can go home and the Machina can't is great. I love her saying, "We can go home," to which Maxis protests, "No, they can't. It's being occupied by the Fog King, and every time they try to take it back, they lose men." She responds that they can go home, as in, there is a home to go to. The Machina don't have that. Her understanding of how Maxis feels, but sternness about the privileged position he is coming from, and the importance of helping those who need it, convinces him and allows them to save Grandel. Melia thrives in this game, and the justice done to her character here was far and away my favorite part of Futures Connected, which is, in and of itself, an improvement over almost every aspect of the base game. Only downside for me is that it couldn't have been a tad longer.
Here we go.
Yes.
Man, that's a lot of talking. Just give me the number score already. I won't be giving a number. Because what's the point? You know everything I have an opinion on, so I'm sure you can infer how I feel about the game. But as a TLDR, I think this game has a lot of charm. Playing through it does give you a feeling of wonder about the world and intrigue into the main character and their place within that world. Unfortunately for me, that wonder is far too often broken up by poor combat and weirdly balanced stakes. And while the base game left me clamoring for deeper exploration of some of the characters, the definitive version comes bundled with a great addition that does justice for one of those characters and gives improvement to almost everything else. So that's the review. Hope you enjoyed. Don't look at the time bar. The review's really done. If what you're after is my thoughts of what's inside a cartridge of Xenoblade's Definitive Edition, you have all that. You can go. But at the end of all this, something still bugs me, and if you don't mind me being a bit introspective for a moment, I want to address it. I said at the top that the idea of doing a review pops into my head for every game I play. That's true for every movie I watch, book I read, media I consume. It never makes it out of my head. I fully figured this would be the same. All of a sudden, it's in the rare position of getting some words on a page. And suddenly, it's 11,000 words long. And I'm digging out an old microphone to record. And I booted up iMovie for the first time in 6 months. I've given a lot of thought as to why this is. Why Xenoblade, of all things, got me to this level of motivation. And commitment. Was it because I told Silas I would do it? No, I doubt it. I say I'm going to do shit all the time and then don't. Was it just that this broke the camel's back? It could have been any game at this point in my life? I don't think so. I think I would have stuck it out one more game and written about Monster Hunter Wilds, a game I had much more anticipation for. Could it be this game spoke to me in a meaningful way that had me committed to this idea? Let's talk about that. I first learned about Xenoblade in high school. I got Smash for 3DS, my first Smash game, somehow over 10 years ago. I was never really a Nintendo kid growing up, so a lot of the characters in it were unknown to me. Shulk was just another Falco, Palutena, or Lucina to me. I had a passing interest in him, but nothing that struck me enough to even consider playing his game. Then, the new Nintendo 3DS came out. And while I got it so I could do Fox Up Airs easier, I was talking with one kid in my algebra class who got it to play Xenoblade. I remember after that conversation being convinced I should pick it up. Give me a more proper use for the handheld I got. I had full intentions of that being my next game, and now can only speculate why that never happened. Probably got too much into Smash. In my freshman year of college, Xenoblade 2 came out. A friend of mine buys the midnight release, and I strike up a conversation about it. It sounds interesting, and the Switch is still relatively new, so I think maybe I should get into it. I ultimately decide not to, because I want to play them in order. Something I knew didn't really matter, and I still insisted on. In 2020,
in a fairy tale kingdom,
Nintendo released a Direct which opened with the Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition trailer. I watched this Direct countless times. There was nothing else to do during March of 2020, as I'm sure you're well aware. Every time I would look up someone else reacting to the Direct, they talked about how they had heard how good Xenoblade was, but never played it themselves. I recall later hovering over the buy button in the eShop simply because of the exposure I got from this period of time in my life, but never fully pulled the trigger. Later on, from late 2020 to 2022, I lived in Gomer House and had Xenoblade accessible to me whenever I wanted it, for free. But I never played it. At this point, there was something almost soothing about not having played it. I'll get to that. I went to Smash tournaments even after college. Yes! And recall getting stuck in several conversations about how good Xenoblade was, and how much I should play it. At this point, I didn't have time. How could I? Full-time job, wife, dog. When can I play Xenoblade? And why would I? I've turned down every opportunity in my life so far to do it. Why would I play a 50-hour RPG at this point in my life? Why would I play a 50-hour RPG at this point in my life? The older I get, the more I have to worry about. My job, and sometimes even my hobbies, have this element of stress to them that they didn't used to have throughout my late teens and early 20s. Because of the place Xenoblade has had, as a background idea, a sort of representation of me saying, I will always be able to do this later. When it came time to play it, and finding time to squeeze it into my schedule, it served as what feels like the end of one part of my life. That may sound dramatic, but the more I think about this, the more I'm convinced this is why the game has felt so impactful to me. For years, I always could have played it, and told myself I can when I want to, and that sort of relaxed feeling about my time has been fading in the last few years. No other game, or really anything, has been so present while at the same time never getting played or watched or listened to. In that way, it has sort of weaseled its way into being a representation of a time that I'm losing. Playing it ends this presence it has had, and that has coincidentally lined up with what feels like a shift in how I am living. Somehow, once I'm done with Xenoblade, it feels like I'm done with college, done with that early part of my life, and moving into proper adulthood, where the prospect of children and careers become less scary, which in of itself scares me. I think I'm ready to answer why I made this review, why I almost 100%ed the DLC, and why, despite not really enjoying the opening, look forward to my time with Xenoblade 2. If finishing Xenoblade feels like, for whatever reason, an end to one point in my life and the start of a new one, and the idea of that new one scares me, it's pretty straightforward that I'm trying to extend this period of my life. I'm trying to squeeze what juice remains from the lemons life gave me, from a period of time I feel shaped me into who I am. Moving forward in my life scares me. What if the new lemons aren't as ripe and don't have the same squeeze? Well, it may feel like I've strayed from Xenoblade and I'm just discussing the fears of growing older. I ultimately think there's some beauty in Xenoblade occupying this role in my life. The fact that I've waited until this moment to play it. A fear of the crossroads between my past and my future is bookended by a game, a work of art, that confidently proclaims about the possibility and beauty in a future, with the full optimism that can go beyond what came before it. To fully listen and appreciate what Xenoblade has to say, I must, ironically, let it go. For so long, I could always play Xenoblade. Now, I have.